Welcome to the Focused Professional Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Lenton, and this is episode 23. Welcome to the Focused Professional Podcast. Today's guest is Sanjay Jogia of Jogia Photography. He has been named one of the top 6 wedding photographers in the world by Professional Photographer magazine. He's a fellow with the BIPP. He is a fellow and master photographer with the SWPP. And he's an ambassador for pretty much all of his equipment by the looks of it. Canon UK, Calibrite, ASO, Fundy, Tether Tools, and more and more and more. So, hey, Sanjay, do you actually pay for anything?
Hello. I do. I have to pay for lots of things. I do. The thing is, I think people have this perception that as an ambassador, they just give you loads of stuff. And there's an element of truth to that, but it's not just, a free for life situation. I mean, that would be amazing.
Lovely. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, with Canon, for example, there are no lifelong freebies as such. It doesn't really work like that. It's, they work on something called it's a loan system. So they have like a long-term loan and then short-term loans. And then the long-term loan is during the course of the contract, you request whatever equipment it is, and you have a quota of how many pieces you can have, and the idea is to obviously use that to create what you create, but then also create content from it for Canon's marketing and that kind of thing. So obviously whatever it is I've requested as long-term loans has to be appropriate for my genre and so on, and creating content and storytelling and so on, and then at the end of it I've got to return it. And then with the short-term loans, it's literally just that, I can request and say, I need XYZ for a project, and I have to give a little explanation as to what the project is and why I need it. By and large, I sort of approve it, but it's sort of a couple of weeks or a month at a time. But yeah, I don't get stuff to keep.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that people don't really know what it means. They just, they see ambassadors around, but they don't really necessarily know what that involves. So, I mean, there must be certain amounts of demands on yourself in order to promote the actual equipment and so on as well. And
yeah.
you were saying you have to create some of the content for them that they can use in marketing?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, the content is a mixture of, sort of social media stuff, because obviously now we are in this social media world where it's almost kind of ruling what we do more than actually what we do. But then it's actually creating content with the equipment for them to be able to use on their website, their blogs, their social media, shows, all that sort of stuff, things like TPS and SWPP. So yeah, creating the content basically means knowing whatever the item is inside out. But in whatever genre, like in my case, I'm mostly weddings and some portraits, but it's talking about the features, the use of that particular equipment specifically for that genre, like which features are going to benefit the wedding photographer, for example, and what's good about it, and how do I use it, how do I customize it to work for me and the way I work and my muscle memory and my vision and so on and so on. So it creates some really interesting content when you really deep dive into these things and how different people set up equipment. And the interesting thing is when you go to something like TPS, for example, or the photography show, for those who don't know the acronym, Canon will do various sort of stage events and talks. So they have their main stage and they have a smaller stage, which they normally call bite size. And on the bite size, they'll have ambassadors and some of their own tech staff come on and talk about how to set a camera up. And you wouldn't believe just how popular those talks are. Quite often they're more popular than a lot of the other sort of main stages you'll see around TPS. People just want to know the best way to set up their tools and how to make it work for them, which is obviously critical, but it's fascinating.
Totally.
Yeah, it's fascinating just how popular that is.
Well, I mean, just I've given it as a silly example on the podcast before from when I've been teaching. The sort of thing that can make a difference to someone, setting up the diopter wheel correctly on a DSLR.
Yeah,
you know, someone can't come to a beginner's class, and it's all of a sudden
it
I can
won't
see.
focus. Yeah, it won't focus.
Little things like that. You know, if it's not obvious to someone when they take it out of the box what they need to do, then setting it up for the autofocus to be as they want it and to suit their style and so on. All these little things can make a huge difference.
Absolutely. And it looks like a tiny little innocuous thing that you never need to touch. But it's so easy for it to get knocked by mistake and you throw the diopter off. It's one of the things I love about the cameras I use is like, so the Canon 1 series ones, they used to be behind the eye cup, so you couldn't accidentally knock it once you set it. And now they've been sort of revealed through the edge, but they have a lock mechanism on them, it sounds really geeky and boring, but it's such an important thing when you put the camera to your eye and you're just like, whoa, what's happened here, you know?
Oh yeah, some of these sort of features that you see them write about with the specifications for new cameras and so on. Initially, you think, is that really necessary? And there are some things like, do I really need 2,000 focal points instead of however many, you know? But these kinds of things, like if the diopter wheel not moving when you're using the thing, or like, for example, I used to do quite a bit of landscape photography and like doing long exposures. And one thing you have to do for that, especially when you've got sort of like lights around you late in the evening, is you've got to block off the viewfinder at the back so you don't get light leaking in. Now, with certain makes, you get the thing on the actual strap, so you've always got it with you. With others, it's a little piece of plastic that you have to remember to bring with you. And when you get a camera where there's a feature of you just press the button and it closes a curtain on it, you think, thank goodness for that. It's super geeky.
It's simple things. You know, going back to the whole ambassador thing and kind of what I do, part of it is also the R&D, the tech development, which I love. I love this. People may not realize, but I am such a geek. I love geeking out with tech and things like this. So there was one year where the engineers from Canon Inc. So if you don't understand how this works, it's you've got Canon Inc., which is Canon Japan, and they're basically the head of the beast. And then you have the other regions. So in the UK, you obviously got Canon UK, which is part of Canon Europe, which whilst they sort of one's part of the other, they're also separate entities. It's all very confusing, but they all answer back to Canon Inc. Canon Inc. control the budgets and that sort of thing, because that's really where everything happens. But the R&D happens everywhere, but it all feeds back to Canon Inc. So the engineers from Canon Inc. were in UK. And normally what happens is that when they come to the UK and meetings happen, we all have to go to the Canon Europe headquarters. But on this one occasion, the product development manager for Canon Europe said that they wanted to come to meet me here in my showroom, and they wanted to see my setup and how I work. They wanted to see my post-production, my printing processes and all this kind of stuff. And they wanted to talk to me about sort of some product development, which was all very exciting. Kid in the candy sauce stuff, basically.
Yeah.
And there was an engineer who was in charge of sensor design. There was another one who's involved in autofocus design. And there was another one that was about firmware and software design and that sort of thing. And so they wanted to know how I set my cameras up. And at the time I was using the 1DX Mark II as my primary camera. And, you know, they said, we want to know how you set your camera up and how you use it and why you use it and the scenarios and, you know, how you utilize those functions and the customization in the different scenarios. And which is great, you know, and then they dropped the best question ever. What do you want in your ideal camera? And I was like, right, I have a list. I have a list. And I literally reeled through this list. And the brilliant thing was half the stuff they were actually already had planned, and the other half they actually integrated. It was brilliant. And one of the things I asked for was something that they used to have in the late 80s, early 90s on I think it was the original EOS 3, the film camera, where it had eye control focus. Now back then we had 5 focus points or something silly like that. You had one in the center and then the diamond shape around it. And the technology just wasn't fast enough to make that particularly usable.
Mm.
So you put the camera to your eye, and you look at one of the focus points, and it'll move the focus point for you. But the processing speeds back then just didn't exist, and the battery technology just didn't exist. So it just wasn't feasible at the time. So I said, you had this technology then. We've now got these mirrorless cameras with however many thousands of focus points, and we just can't manually move it where we want to. So there's a couple of things which would be awesome. One would be to I don't know about you or a lot of your viewers, but the way I disable the focus on my actual shutter button on the trigger, and I use back button focus. So then,
do I, yeah.
Yeah, and then on the Canons, on the 1 series, they have these buttons on the front, these customizable buttons, just kind of around where your index and your middle finger go around the grip.
Yeah.
Okay, so that you can use your your first finger to press the shutter, and then the middle finger to press the two multifunction buttons. So you're utilizing 3 digits of your hand, and you're basically holding the camera with 2. Okay.
Yeah.
So one thing was balance around the hand, the ergonomics of that. This is getting really geeky, isn't it? and then you have the thumb on the back button focus on the AF button on the back. But then if, like me, before all the hyper clever AI focusing systems came along, you used to move the focus point around with your thumb. So there was a little kind of keyboard, like a little joystick thing on the back where you can move the focus point around. If you're moving that around, your finger's not on the AF button. So you have to swap from one to the other.
Yeah.
Okay. So then I said, can we integrate some kind of like mouse trackpad thing on the AF button? And they did it. So basically it has this little sensor rather than a physical ball or anything that tracks the movement of your thumb whilst it's on the AF button, so you can move the pointer around wherever you want it.
That's neat.
That is neat. Yeah. So they put that on the 1DX Mark III, and they've had it ever since. And then I said the other thing you had was this eye control thing from the 80s. The technology is here now. Everything has AI in it. Can we bring this back? And they brought it back. So they brought it back in the R3, and they've put it in the R5 Mark II and the R1 as well, the new R1. So it's basically you put your camera to your eye, you calibrate it to your eye, and wherever your eye looks is where the focus point goes. Which is brilliant. And so this is one of the things I love about being an ambassador, is being able to spitball crazy ideas, and the engineers would be like, yeah, let's have a look at this thing, and then they just do it. It's awesome.
That sounds like great fun.
It is great fun.
I suppose the slight downside must be, if you're working with the really new kit, is the processing, because if you're getting a great new sensor with fantastic raw files coming off it, and none of the processing exists for it yet, so all your major programs, they take a while to catch up, don't they?
It's less of a problem than you might think, actually. It was a problem initially, particularly with the 8K, because when Canon launched the R5 Mark I with the 8K, I think people kind of misunderstood the power of it and its intention in that particular camera, which was, it gives you an extra option. It gives you more versatility. It's not intended to be an 8K video camera, but it's a photographer's camera. And the intention was there would be a cinema camera that sort of came with it. And the problem was that a lot of computing hardware and software couldn't process the 8K file. So Canon created something as a stopgap, because Canon obviously work with all the main OEM software manufacturer, not just software, but paper and things like that, to prepare for the launch of products. So for example, when they launch a new camera, they have to create support with Adobe. So they have to try and sync the launch of one and have all the other stuff prepared, so that when they sell, the users can just go, it's sort of plug and play. But when beta testing, we have to use a lot of beta stuff in the background. There's obviously have to be very careful about what I say here. There's certain things I can and can't say.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
But with things like this, when we're beta testing equipment, we get given beta bits of software, and the idea is to during the process, iron out the bugs. Iron out the software bugs, the hardware bugs, all this kind of stuff. And so there's lots of versioning that goes on, but that's the fun of it. It's like, I know what this thing is supposed to do, but here's a problem here that, this could work better. Well, let's try changing the interface or the menus or how we operate certain functionality, how we deal with it afterwards. So when it comes to new video files or raw files or something like that, we have to use the Canon plugin to be able to process those. But quite often what, manufacturers like Canon are doing is actually already working with people like Adobe in the background to have the codecs and all that sort of stuff ready, so that whilst we're beta testing, we can see what it's like to work with in the real world. It's just that version of the Adobe software isn't necessarily available to everybody at this stage. So everything is done with NDAs and so on. It's awesome fun.
That makes sense. Oh yeah, and NDAs are great fun, aren't they? Really is. With the amount of times when you sign an NDA for doing some work, and you think that at some point you can say what you were doing and reveal the images from it. That's but right. By that time that point arrives, you forgot that you did it. Quite often. It was so long ago. Yeah. But do you then use it for client work if you've got a new piece of equipment and they want it tested in a real client situation?
Yeah, it depends on what it is, and it depends on the project. So, for example, when the EOS R first came out, so Canon's first full-frame mirrorless, they wanted me to create some wedding content for it. But the problem was there was, like with any brand and any manufacturer, there are NDAs and there are embargoes and that sort of thing, because they're going to synchronize their marketing and their launches and all this sort of stuff, which is, normal. Yeah. They wanted me to create some content, but I couldn't take it out into the wild and shoot a wedding with it because it was under NDA and there was an embargo. So it created all sorts of, practical issues, logistical issues.
Holding it in a paper bag with a hole cut in the front or something.
Well, that's a little bit of a giveaway. Even just taping up the front of the camera wouldn't have been enough, because it was so different to everything else that was in the lineup. It would have just been a dead giveaway. Yeah. So, in those sorts of situations, sometimes you have to just change the plan slightly, where in that particular instance, I shot a wedding. It was the biggest wedding of the year for me that year. Mm-hmm. On the day of the launch of the EOS R. And it was a global simultaneous launch. It was a really big deal. And they wanted me to be at the launch event, but I was shooting this wedding, so I couldn't be there, which I was a bit gutted about. But in the end, it turns out that the wedding I shot was the first ever wedding photographed on the Canon mirrorless system anywhere in the world. And it became a thing for Canon. It became part of the story. So actually it worked out really well. And they used the images they still use the images for that all over. So I represent EMEA for Canon, so Europe, Middle East, Africa. So they still use these images all over EMEA, which is awesome. Some of you may have seen it. It's one of the images is a picture of the bride with her hand over her eye, showing her henna art on the back of her hand. That was one of the series of images that they used and they still use. So, it yielded some interesting solutions because of the logistics. And during COVID, when the R5 was coming out and I had to create content for the 8K, COVID was slightly easier. I basically said, look, I'm going to create a private shoot with, a singer that I know who's quite well known in kind of the Indian musical world. And we went to a venue that was owned by a friend, and, she's a model.
That helps.
Yeah. And then we had her partner as well, who's an old friend, and created some beautiful stuff. So yeah, it just depends on the situation, really.
So with all of this, on the one hand, I can imagine it must be a lot of fun, and you can engage with it on a techie level and get quite inspired by that as well. But I wonder, how do you feel in yourself now that you've reached this point in the industry? Is it something that you can relax into? Is it something that you feel pressure that you're representing these brands, and you're representing your own brand, which everybody knows is a very high-end brand? How does it feel for you working as Sanjay these days?
It's a really good question. There's never any relaxing. You can take a breath when you sort of cross one of these milestones and just kind of savor that. But then I think each time and this applies to anybody and everybody, whatever the milestone is, whether it's professional, personal, whatever, when you reach a milestone, you have to remember that the celebration is for the work that was done getting to that milestone, not the actual getting to the milestone.
Yeah.
And it's like awards as well. It's the same thing, in a wedding, awards are a milestone. And what it means is that, okay, you can relax into it a little bit and enjoy the moment, but then the hard work starts again, and then it gets even harder. The air gets thinner the further up you climb up your own personal mountain of whatever the achievements are that you're wanting to achieve, and it becomes harder and harder to get there. It just does, and you can make rapid progress in any field very quickly. It's sort of it's exponential, and then it plateaus, and then the work gets harder and harder and harder, and it's sort of achieving that final few percentages takes exponentially more work. But you have to keep unlocking something in yourself, and it's the same for you hear sports people say this all the time. I think it applies everywhere, because the challenges are not the same for everybody. The challenges are different for everybody, and who you are, your circumstances, your mindset, your vision, your goals, ultimately what it is you want to achieve, and the reason behind it. And I think the reason behind it is the biggest thing. It's not the challenge itself necessarily. It's the motivation behind that challenge.
Definitely. So, I mean, for you, has the reason behind it, has the motivation remained constant, or has it evolved as you've reached those various milestones? I mean, do you still pick up a camera for the same reason as you did years ago before you became what you are now?
That's also a very interesting question. I think the reasons need to evolve all the time. They do. The motivation, it wavers, of course. We're human. And some days you just want to have a 3-hour lie-in. And other days you just, sort of rearing to jump out of bed and get on with it. Other days you don't even get to bed. You're just working all night on stuff, which has kind of been the theme of life recently. But, I think you have to use your life experiences to set your goals and your targets. Ultimately, that's what it's about. It's about you evolving as a human. And I think we manifest that evolution in different ways, creatively, professionally, personally, physically, whatever it is, any combination of. Do I pick up the camera for the same reason I used to? Even when I was a kid and I used to pick up a camera, it probably wasn't I wouldn't say it was necessarily for the urge to get up and just take pictures. I don't think it ever has been. Not even. I don't think it ever has been for me. It's an interesting one. Even with mobile phones or whatever, I know a lot of people get sort of snap happy with their phones and whatever. I hardly take pictures on my phone. Hardly.
Oh, I don't. I always get stuck when someone hands me a mobile phone and says, "Could you just take picture?" I'm like, no.
Yeah, exactly. I think when I was a kid, I used to take pictures more to understand the tool, to see what it can do and to see what I'm capable of with it. And it became a creative challenge rather than just a sheer document of whatever it is. And I'll do that. If I get into the moment or whatever it is I'm photographing, as a kid, I'm motivated by the results, the creativity, and that's the stimulation. It's not just like, oh, this is happening over here, quickly go and shoot that. Oh, this is happening over here, quickly go and shoot that. That was never the motivation, because things are happening around us all of the time. And this is just how I perceive it. Things are happening around us all of the time. If whatever that isn't, what's the word I'm thinking of, isn't stimulating me, or if I'm not resonating with it and it's not triggering any particular response emotionally, it becomes a lazy exercise just to capture that.
Okay.
And I think that's probably how I fuel what I do in weddings. I need to be emotionally engaged. So I go through a process with my couples of getting emotionally attached to them, for want of a better phrase, because if I have that emotional attachment with them, I photograph the day through the eyes of a loved one. I become a friend capturing the wedding of a friend.
Sure. Yeah.
And that motivates me far more than just being there getting paid to do what I do. I don't want to be seen as just the pro with the camera, and I'm faceless and nameless and, and just be this nondescript ninja. I need, and, we need to work like that, but we're also human. And what we're doing is a very social thing. So we have to engage with people. We have to engage with the friends and the guests. And I need for them to feel comfortable with me and my team. And I want my couples to trust my process and trust my direction and trust my advice and my experience and expertise and vision and everything else. That's only going to come through emotional engagement. So whatever I photographed recreationally as a kid was something that really appealed to me.
Yeah.
So it could have been, the first time I actually shot a wedding was my uncle's wedding. And I wasn't there as a pro. I was, I don't know, 10, 12 years old or something. And his wedding was in Sydney. So we all flew out to Sydney to photograph this wedding. And they had the traditional wedding photographer back then. It was like late 80s when he got married. And he was one guy from here as well, flown out there. Everything was film. And he shot in his traditional way. He would get on the microphone and tell people what to do and all this kind of stuff, which I found really embarrassing. Really, really embarrassing. And I just remember thinking, if I become a photographer, I'm never doing it like that. And I was a very shy kid. I still am quite shy. And I used to always photograph things from a distance. I just sit and watch people watching.
Yeah,
and photograph the people watching. If there was something interesting happening, laughter and engagement, or what a detail or whatever it is, I'd see it from a distance and I'd shoot it from a distance. So I kind of developed my documentary style of photography like that. Is just through shyness. I see what I see. Let me set my shot up for it. I'll prepare for it. Kind of hide behind the camera a little bit. Maybe if I'm aiming at something and they notice me and they think, oh, that's cute. Look at that cute kid with a camera sort of thing. And then they stop and they pose to the camera, and that's not really what I want. So I'd lower the camera, pretend like I was looking somewhere else until they got back to doing what they were doing. But by this point, I'm sort of preset, pre-focused, pre-exposed, because it was all manual. And then just kind of shoot from just, with the camera just away from my face slightly. So it kind of looked like I was looking somewhere else.
So you're after that genuine sort of emotion, not that sort of stage thing. You mentioned when you were talking about that, about your team. So those that work with you, I mean, everybody knows you and you're the figurehead for the business. How much then do you need other people within your business? And do they share the same approach as you, or do they bring a slightly different sort of complementary approach?
It's a bit of both. It needs to be a bit of both. Variety is the spice of life, apparently. So, I think if they share in my vision and my approach, but they can bring a different element, and I rely on different personalities because I'm shy. The characters are all different. One of my guys, he's very outgoing and seems to know everybody. So whichever wedding we go to, they will, people seem to know him and he seems to know people, which is great. So I can send him to do the grip and grins and the more social stuff, and he'll be doing the documentary stuff most of the time. And I love crafting the portraits. So that's kind of the thing that I do. That's the stage stuff that I do. But the grip and grins, which are really important, because people love those shots, and I'll do them. Just because I'm shy doesn't mean I won't do them. If I see something going on, I'll just say, "Hey guys, let me get a shot of you." And people love those shots. So you get a combination of everything. You get the documentary stuff, you get the beautifully crafted portraits, and then you get those, those grip and grins that people love, as well as the formal group shots, which, I'll set up as so it's in a studio with all the lighting and posing and directing and everything to go with it. So they get a bit of everything.
Now, how much is that planned, and how much is a response to the venue, to the light, and so on?
Again, it's a very fluid, adaptable process. The more we plan in terms of the framework of the day, the timing, the flow, where everyone needs to be to do what with the couple, with the client, the better, because then everyone's prepared and, there's an expectation that's set. Things like the family group shots, they need to be planned because, that's kind of where you can really hemorrhage time on the day. If they're sort of making up as they go along, everything takes far longer. And with Indian weddings, we're talking about anything between 20 and 40 group shots.
Wow. Yeah.
And the big groups.
That's quite something.
It is, the big groups. So, I don't like taking shots for the sake of it. If I'm going to if we're taking an hour and a half out of the day to do these shots, I want them to count, and I want them to enjoy looking at them in the future. So we'll take time to craft the shots, light the shots, pose everybody. But that just means that the organization has to be there, because if, say, they're making it up as they go along and it takes 5-10 minutes per group just to find people and round them up, man, we're hemorrhaging time. If we've got 20 shots, how long is that going to take?
Yeah.
10 minutes a shot. That's a long, long time.
Yep.
So I pre-plan this stuff with couples, and I say, look, you've got to sit with your parents and really thrash out who you want photographs of. Focus on who you consider to be the VIPs. Let's get those in as the top 10 on the list, and then work out who else you feel you need to have group shots of. And you make that list definitive, and you do not let any sort of stragglers on the day and ad hoc group shots. You just don't allow that, because they take too long and you'll lose time, especially if the day's already running late.
Yeah.
And I've sort of perfected this process to the point where I tell the couple they need 3 minutes per group, but I actually get it done in 90 seconds. So that's getting people on, posing everybody, taking 3 shots. They can say their congratulations really quickly. We kick them off the stage. And, but it works by having a team around us. So, a Toastmaster or a wedding planner, or if they're not going to go down that route and they're going to have a cousin or a friend or an uncle or something organize this, they need someone on each side, the bride's side and the groom's side, to make sure there's one group ready for me whilst I'm photographing one group. So it becomes like a bit of a production line.
Yes.
But they're done really well.
Yeah.
I just end up saving time half the time, or catching up with any delay if there's any from the start of the day.
Yeah. Yeah. Certain things like that. I think if you try and wing it, as you say, you do the maths and start realizing you're wasting hours potentially of time, and you haven't got that time when people are in these occasions. I suppose the other aspects of it, which I wonder about, is you photograph wedding ceremonies for people from a variety of different backgrounds, different religions, different cultures, and so on. How in tune do you feel you have to be with the culture or the ceremony in order to photograph it? Because if somebody would just sort of think it had never been to an Indian wedding, for example, and would just think, actually, I love all the colour, the outfits and everything, I think I'll get into photographing Indian weddings. Are there any sort of difficulties they might have if they don't understand what's going on?
That's a very interesting question. And I've not had to think about that for a long time, obviously. So,
yeah, sure, yeah.
And kind of reframing that sort of mentally for me. I remember when I first started, it was fueled by the fascination of whatever the custom or the ceremony was. And of course, I'd research it right at the beginning, whether it was a Hindu wedding or a Sikh wedding or a Muslim wedding or a Jewish wedding or, whatever it is. And the fascination basically meant that you're more attentive, you're more present, because not only are you paying attention to what are the key parts of the ceremony, but how people will respond and react to it, which is the emotional engagement again. So this is me engaging emotionally because of my own fascination, but me engaging with the emotions of the people around me, because that's really what we're capturing. And when we're photographing, what are we photographing? Are we photographing just what we see? Are we photographing the 3D around us, or are we photographing what the synergy of what makes up the moment? And it's the synergy which is the important part. And synergy is a combination of the 3D, the energy, the emotion, and the fact that that timestamp in the history of the universe, as far as we are concerned as 3-dimensional humans, will only happen once. Let's not get into quantum physics.
Oh dear.
let's not go down that route. But it's because then we'll be here for days. But
yeah, is it possible for the same person to be getting married in multiple locations in different
ways? Yeah.
Multiverses or whatever? No, we're not going there.
It's always happening.
No.
So,
no, my head's not quite ready for that this afternoon.
That would be a fun podcast if you would decide.
Yes.
So, yeah, it is about the emotion, because I think it's safe to say when we each see a photograph, that makes up a pivotal point in history. We remember from our history books, we all perceive that moment in a different way. We all have a different emotional impact. And there's probably a couple of pivotal photos for me that really inspired my love of photography. One personal and one through history. And the one in history that people will know is The Napalm Girl by Nick Hook.
Oh, yes.
And when I was in high school and we were studying the Vietnam War, and we had whatever the history book was called, I can't remember now. That one picture was haunting, and it was just the expression on the girl's face. It was nothing else. It wasn't the soldiers and the fact that her environment was war torn and she was, there was these two kids running around naked in the streets. It wasn't that. It was the sheer terror in her face, her eyes and her mouth and her expression. And for me, that made up everything. If you were to put your thumb over her face, that picture would mean nothing to me. And that's the point. To me, if I put my thumb over her face, that picture would mean nothing.
Yeah.
And I think this is the beauty of photography, and videography, cinematography, that's slightly different. You're sort of spoon-fed what's going on. Obviously, you can invoke emotion through the edit, through the music, through the pace, and the visuals. And we all know if we're watching a movie and you mute the audio, it's just a lot of stuff happening on the screen. If you're working and editing and you have a movie on in the background and you've got the audio going on, you can kind of picture what's happening in your mind, but your mind fills in the gaps through its imagination. And that's what photography does. You've got a still frame, a capture of a moment. And the reference is your emotional charge that you attach to that moment. And you'll remember a moment very differently because our memories are unreliable. And that's the beauty of photography.
Yeah,
that's what we're using.
yeah.
We're using our unreliability of our memory to endow that moment, that photo, with its power.
So could you say how this relates to what you advertise on your website and elsewhere? You talk about your fantasy and reality approach.
Yeah.
Can you say how that relates to this?
So the reality is the documentary, everything as it happens unstaged, undirected.
Yeah.
The action, the reaction, the emotion that goes with it. So, let's say, for example, in a Hindu wedding, which is conducted under a 4-post canopy called a mandap, there's certain people involved in that, obviously the bride and groom and the priest, and then, the bride's parents, and usually other members of their family at different stages of the ceremony. It's quite a long ceremony, typically about 90 minutes. But then you have your guests, and the guests are there to engage emotionally and spiritually, which is one really important reason why everyone should put their phones away, because then they're not engaged emotionally or spiritually. They're just they're engaged through their screen, and there's no actual connection there. And I think that's really important, particularly in a Hindu set. I'm Hindu, and the Vedic ceremonies. So the Vedic ceremony is the Hindu ceremony. It's a very, like all religions and like all ceremonies, a very spiritual act. And union of two spirits and two bodies. And ideally what you want at a wedding is you don't just want to make up numbers for the sheer hell of it. You want the people there who are energetically and spiritually engaged and happy for you. You want that positivity all the way through.
Yeah.
So the reality is attempting to capture that, and I say an attempt, because we are limited physically by our speed, by our, our position in the room to what's happening. Yeah. So you have to...
And micro expressions come and go so fast
absolutely.
that to catch it is very, very difficult, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know a lot of people joke about, cameras and technology, and, it's how you use it. It's not the tool. But, of course it's how you use the tool. But if you've got a tool that's capable of doing so much more for you, and you know how it works, and you know how it works, that's the key thing.
Definitely.
It increases the chances of you to be able to capture those moments, and that attempt becomes more and more successful. So, the job of the reality part is to attempt to capture this and embody that emotion, so that when you go back and relive the moments in the photography, the actual photos, it stirs those emotions up again. And so that's a very complicated description of a very simple thing that we're trying to do. But what we as photographers think is simple, but when you try to break down how it's done, there's millions of things happening in our minds in any given moment.
Absolutely.
You know?
Yeah.
And there's hundreds of decisions we have to make when we're handling our camera to be able to capture that moment, because the options are there. Or you could just stick it in P mode and let the camera do everything. Yeah, but then you
P for professional, as everybody always says. Yeah.
But the thing with that is it's taking a lot of decision making away from you, and you end up with a lot of potential inconsistencies. You know, so that's that side of thing, is capturing the day as it happened, warts and all.
So, I mean, given that that's subjective anyway, then where does this line into the fantasy come for you?
Yeah.
So, you know, obviously our approach to the reality aspect is, yes, we're being as faithful as we can be to what's there, but yet it's still a subjective interaction. It's still our choice of an angle of a moment and so on. Where does that then blend into the fantasy side for you?
Yeah, again, really good question. So a wedding is more often than not a dream, you know, for one or both of the couple. It's something that, you know, certainly Indian parents have spent the entire life of their child preparing for. And it's life-changing for everybody. It's life-changing for the couple. It's life-changing for the parents. Life-changing for siblings. And it's such a huge milestone in life when you get married. The notion is you're setting off on this journey with somebody, this adventure with somebody, prepared as best as you can be as a person, mentally, emotionally, physically, financially, as much as possible. And the fantasy is a visual representation of that vision of the couple's ideal self.
Okay.
It's supposed to create a touchstone for the couple. You put on your wall, and, you know, a daily reminder of, this is who we set out to be. You know, this is who we imagined ourselves to be on the wedding day, as a reminder, as life begins to evolve and you change and you grow, but you also pick up the residue of life, you know, and you're coated by that residue, which can mean that you very easily forget who you are, what you're supposed, you know, what you set out to do, what your purpose is. And purpose is always evolving, and who you are is always evolving, of course. You know, and that residue becomes part of that new DNA, that evolving DNA. But you always need a touchstone. You always need a reminder. You know, for years I had my logo, my business logo, which is kind of an abstraction of my eye, a graphical abstraction of a photograph of my eye.
Right.
And then I changed it to a picture of my mum and I. I lost my mum when I was 15, and I have very few photographic memories, and that's one of the other photos that, you know, for me was pivotal. But, you know, and that's also one of the reasons I got into photography as well. It felt like I have a duty to create these memories for people, because I don't have enough myself. You know, I was 15. You barely remember anything until the age, you know, before the age of 2 or 3. So I really had sort of 12, 13 years of useful memories with mum, and, you know, a handful of photographs. So, I understand the power of this for people.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, and so the fantasy sort of, and this is why I take time to do those family group shots as well, because I know what the power of those photographs are going to be later in life. Yeah. You know, try and create some of these stage moments with the couple and their parents and their siblings and that sort of thing. But yeah, the fantasy ones are more for the couple as do you remember there was this AI app a few years ago? I think it was called Lenza or something like that, Lenza. And you feed it photographs of yourself, and it creates all these fantasy versions of you.
Oh, what, like as a Viking or as a Roman soldier or whatever?
Sort of yeah.
Okay,
exactly.
Yeah, I never used it, but I did see some results that people posted from it. Yeah,
it was fun. I had a bit of fun with it. But, you know, this is what the fantasy side of the wedding photography is. You know, this couple are setting off on this journey together of creating their family, you know, and it becomes also a touchstone for their kids in the future. So, you know, it's not just, well, you know, there are some PJ photographers, there are some portrait photographers. How about I just throw the two together and create something that's different? That wasn't the motivation behind it. The motivation behind it was a lot more philosophical than that.
Right. Okay. Well, yeah. Thanks for explaining that. It's useful to know. What would you say then is the aspect of your work that brings you the most joy as a wedding photographer?
Oh, that's also a really good question. You're full of them today, aren't you? Well, I think it depends on the day. It really does. I try to make as much of it as fun as possible. Like with any job or business, there are elements which are just dull as hell. Like culling bores the hell out of me. It really does. Thank God for AI. But, I love meeting new people. I love discovering different things about new people, but I also love discovering something about myself during the process. What appeals to me and what doesn't, what resonates, because it's helping to refine me as I get older.
Sure.
Yeah, and this applies to everyone. It's not just me, but I think it applies to everybody. I think evolution is the acceptance of necessary change once it's registered in your psyche as something that's beneficial. I just made that up. That was really good, wasn't it?
You suddenly turned into a guru, like you've been sort of sitting on a pole in the middle of a desert for months on end or something.
It's funny.
You suddenly come out with it.
I went to this cricket match a few years ago, and I had this guy come up to me, just start talking to me randomly. I'm like, oh, he's a friendly bloke, and we were talking for about 5 minutes, and then he stops and pauses and looks at me, and he goes, "You are Jay Shetty, aren't you?" I'm like, no. And he's just like, oh. And he kind of politely wrapped up the conversation and went about his business.
Well, if you get bored with all this, say you can go and live in a cave in the middle of nowhere, and people can come to you for your pearls of wisdom.
It's tempting. Yeah. I don't think you need to sit in a cave for that, but maybe top of a mountain for a few months, but that'd be.
That might be all right. Yeah. Okay, the flip side then. So we've said about what you enjoy, what brings joy to you. What about stress? What stresses you the most with regard to your work and that?
It's probably. I think it's probably a common thing. Uncertainty is one thing. Mm-hmm. I'm very systematic as a person. I like my background is I'm a qualified architect. A training qualified as an architect. Photography and architecture are very, very similar. Believe it or not, very similar. They're just different mediums, but almost everything behind it's the same. And they're both technical, they're both creative. The creativity side of it should terrify me because there's uncertainty there, but actually that's where the excitement is. Now, here's an interesting thing. It's commonly accepted that the physiological signal for fear and excitement are the same. Did you know that?
Well, I can relate to that in a slightly deeper way in some respects, because I have a problem identifying some of my emotions. It's related to being neurodivergent, being autistic. And to me, some feel the same. And I actually have to think, what is it?
Which one is
that I'm reacting to? So actually, excitement and fear for me, physiologically can feel exactly the same. And I have to say, hang on a minute, what am I feeling? Which is it? So yes, it does.
It could actually be. It could also be a benefit, couldn't it? Because if you're not recognizing fear as fear, you end up going into whatever you need to do sort of unhindered, which is amazing. If we could switch fear off when it's necessary.
If it were only that you could just choose which one you wanted. I mean, sadly not quite that straightforward.
But so, in terms of what stresses me out, uncertainty in terms of, like with anybody, I don't think that really needs explaining, but, on a wedding, there's a lot of uncertainty, but that creates some anxiety, but some excitement as well, because, with the uncertainty is opportunity. And I think so long as you're looking at the opportunity, you can flip that, you can reframe that fear into excitement. What stresses me out is I'm generally a very chilled person. Very few things stress me out. Bad drivers stresses me out.
Well, living in London, you got plenty of them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've mellowed over my, in my old age, in my teens and 20s, I used to get very frustrated at other drivers. Like, I just couldn't comprehend how people didn't know how to do basic things like this. And to me, it was basic, and I know for others it isn't. What else stresses me out? COVID stressed me up because of the uncertainty, and it had such a big impact on our industry, on our finances, on our personal lives, on everything. And I think the moment I allowed it to enter me, it became an ambient anxiety that, lasted a very long time. And I didn't realize how long it lasted until I put attention on it and, allowed it to sort of slowly dissipate.
Yeah, it did. It was very profound for an awful lot of people. And what I found talking to some people that can seem quite strange in some respects is there might be, you want to do things, you want to have a freedom to do certain things, and COVID took some of that away. But the irony of it might be that often there were things you wouldn't necessarily do anyway, but because you didn't have that freedom, because you didn't have that sense of being able to choose yes or no, that it became a problem.
That's right.
So somebody who might not, for example, go to the cinema regularly anyway, COVID comes in and says, thou shalt not go to the cinema, it's not allowed. There's that part in your brain that just think, regardless of whether I would have done it anyway, it's that freedom that you feel is going, that you feel a bit sort of trapped.
Yeah, freedom, absolutely. We want the freedom to choose whatever it is, but just the freedom to choose. And so when you combine that lack of freedom to choose plus the uncertainty of everything that COVID brought, it was kind of a perfect storm, wasn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
But in terms of daily life, I wake up and I meditate every day. I take 20 minutes to sit and meditate and recalibrate my physical being with my inner being. I'm quite a spiritual person. And
do you find then that helps to? Does it help to dissipate the stress, or do you find it helps the stress to bounce off you a little bit more when something happens?
Both. The earlier in the day you meditate, the better, because before your monkey brain kicks in and you start thinking about life and looking at your phone and your messages and all that sort of stuff, you've just woken up from a deep slumber and a mental reset. You've allowed the plaque in your brain to get broken down by the deep sleep process. And, wake up, go freshen up, and then just sit on the bed and meditate for 20 minutes. I plug in headphones, noise cancelling headphones.
So does that mean you have some music or ambient noise going through it?
Sometimes,
or is that...
sometimes. So sometimes I'll follow a guided meditation, just it's like a kind of a grounding meditation, which is really nice. And by the end of it, it's one thing is kind of creating that shield to allow stress to not penetrate my aura, if you like. And part of it is to help. If I don't get to meditate first thing and I meditate later, then obviously partially is to bring down whatever stresses the day's presented, and carry on about my day. I quite like the very, very chilled feeling at the end of it, And I always check my heart rate monitor and see what my lowest heart rate was. It's always during meditation, and sometimes it goes down as low as the other day. It went down to 38 beats a minute.
Wow.
Yeah,
okay.
whilst meditating.
That's interesting. That sort of competitive chilling out. Yeah.
Yes.
It's kind of, you normally think of them as being kind of antithetical. That idea. But once you get that competitive edge in there, it's quite difficult to relax. But
it's like the competition needs adrenaline.
Yes.
And cortisol.
Yes,
the competition here is to try and drain it as much as possible.
Well, exactly. That's like the words "try" and "relax."
Yeah.
When someone says that to you, you think
it stresses you out even more.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been fascinating for me. I'm studying positive psychology, and it's been fascinating for me seeing a lot of how science has caught on to aspects of mindfulness and meditation and things that in the past, I suppose, people might have thought of as being from a culture they didn't understand, or perhaps being religious or in some sort of way, that actually it has proven benefits to our well-being, in particularly the idea of mindfulness. And that for me, do you know, for someone like myself who's used to being very busy, and my brain is a busy place, I initially kind of thought of meditation as always, and mindfulness as always being having to be sitting still, doing nothing, thinking of nothing. And boy, oh boy, did I struggle with that.
Yeah.
But when you suddenly realize with mindfulness, there was one person, their way of put it is just sort of being aware of what you're doing while you're doing it.
Yeah, being witness to what you're doing, yeah.
Is basically what they said. And you suddenly realize, yeah, I'm sitting here eating my dinner. I don't know what half of it has tasted like because I'm busy thinking about something
Other
else.
Stuff, exactly, yeah.
And
it's that presence, isn't it?
Yeah. It makes a big difference. And it's not sort of that you've got to sit in a weird position with your legs bent underneath you. You can if you want to, fine. You know, if you're still young enough and flexible enough to do those sort of things, then great. But it's the idea that you can benefit from something so simple. Like I jokingly said to someone the other day, you know, I think I might do some mindful wine drinking later tonight, you know, a glass of red wine.
I get it.
And I shall just, you know, smell it and drink it and appreciate it for what it is rather than just pouring it down your throat. Yeah, exactly.
No, but it makes sense. And the thing is that we should be doing that all the time, you know, sort of when we're eating, we tend to be distracted by everything going on around us, you know, not having your phone at the dinner table, not having the TV on in the background, you know, having a conversation while you eat with friends or family and that kind of thing is, you know, tends to become quality time because you're spending time with those people. But, you know, there's a moment where you need to just savor the food, savor the moment and be grateful for what's there, what's in front of you. And, you know, the mindful moment in those situations is like, I'll always just give some gratitude internally before I sit down to eat dinner and at the end of dinner to appreciate that. And basically means you're not then just sort of mindlessly inhaling the food and you forgot what it tasted like because you just weren't paying attention. One of the sort of books that really helped me in the last couple of years with lots of sort of life changes going on is The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. I don't know if you've ever read that.
Oh, yes. I've got it on my bookshelf. I haven't read it yet.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So I would say don't do the audio book because ironically, you won't be mindful when you're listening to it.
I never got on with audiobooks myself. I know some people absolutely love them, but for me, I need a book.
Yeah.
It's just how I am.
I'm not a fan of audiobooks because you kind of then slave to the way it's been narrated. Whereas a book, and this comes back to the photography as well, right? Is, you know, the whole capturing the eyes, the day through the eyes of a loved one, is you read the book in your own voice, or a version of the other person if you know who they are, but it's still through a filter of your own personality. And that's where the engagement of the content actually has its power. If you're reading it as a third person impartially, you will perceive that content differently to your own filter. And the whole point of that book is to help you understand your filter. My book has brackets and highlighter pens and exclamation, you know, wow signal, exclamation marks in the margins on every page.
Right.
Because, you know, reading it, I'm just like, wow, that's so simple, you know, but it's just been framed in such a beautiful way. And you get parts of it that you can just randomly flick through and just pick up, and you kind of read that paragraph, and you might read that whole chapter again.
Yeah, that was one of those things with when I studied that people often were saying, "Oh, highlight things" and so on. But for me, almost for the same reason, I don't.
Okay.
It's not just the neat freak in me that likes a neat book, because yes, I do like a book to be in a good condition. For me, if a book has been written in or underlined, it's like if I get something out of the library and somebody else has highlighted something, it's skewing my reading, I find.
Yeah, I get it.
I want it to kind of speak to me fresh each time I'm reading something, because I know I'll come to it, whatever it is, you know, it can be a book on anything. At whatever point in life you come to a book, you're bringing different baggage with you. And, you know, you can then read it in a slightly different way. If I take a book and mark it and then come to it 10 years later, in a way, I don't want it to be exactly the same as for me as it was 10 years ago.
Yeah,
and
I get it.
That's why I struggle with, I get a book out of the library and open it up and go, oh no, someone's written in it.
This is interesting. And again, it comes down to our perception of it, because like, would you say you're a champion reader? You know, do you get a book and power through it?
I read quickly. I've always read quickly. Ever since I was a kid, I learned to read very young and read a lot of books.
Mm-hmm.
But I have a thirst for understanding. I have a thirst for learning, and I may work through a book a little bit more quickly because there's something else I want to get onto and read as well, and
Sure.
bring the ideas together. You know, it varies. And then there'll be a book where you read something and you think, actually, I can't go any further in this book until I've sat with it for a while.
Yeah. And the kind of linear process. And that's the thing with me is, depending on what I'm doing, I can do things kind of multi-track in a very parametric way. And in other things, it's linear, like reading a book.
Mm-hmm.
I need to start at the beginning and finish at the end. But what I've discovered is with things like The Power of Now, which I had read before, and when I read it again, it meant something different to me because obviously now my filter has changed over time, which is what happens.
Yeah.
And even those paragraphs or sections that I'd highlighted read differently. And that's the beauty of it, I think. Now, I don't know if you can tell from the picture here. I know you're not going to show video on the podcast, but I'm a clean freak. My environment needs to be clean for me to operate. And what it does is, if it's not, I'll clean it up, and that sets me up. That prepares me for my tasks ahead. So even with books, especially with something like The Power of Now, if there were 5 people in my household, I'd make sure there are 5 copies, one for everybody, so that everyone can make it their own. Because I think there's so much to learn in that book. There are a handful of books which, have been profound in terms of helping me to understand myself better, and that's definitely one of them. But that whole mindfulness is powerful.
Yeah, I love reading. I love reading different ideas, different backgrounds, and so on. And I mean, I bring aspects from linguistics into the way I think about photography in terms of like visual rhetoric, and my mind's a sort of a melting pot of all sorts of weird things, which are probably a scary place for most people. But I love seeing connections between things and putting one thing and another thing together that wouldn't normally go together and see what happens,
Yeah.
Like some kind of a mad scientist, but with ideas,
Well, that's the best way, isn't it? They say, I don't know who they are, but they say that the night before something was a breakthrough, it was a crazy idea. And you need to be able to sit and have these crazy ideas and kind of explore beyond what's the accepted norm in order to change people's perceptions of things. And then that now becomes a new recalibrated perception. And then it comes right back to what you were saying to me at the very beginning. It's like, do I relax into this thing? No, this is exactly the process.
Yeah, and it's kind of, if you're somebody who likes to grow, you've got to make peace with the fact that you're going to be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Because if you want it, you can't be comfortable all the time and growing.
There is no growth in the comfort zone, and I know how stereotypical and pastiche and tacky, not tacky, but cheesy, corny that sounds. But it's the truth. You just don't grow when you're comfortable and happy. Because if you're comfortable and happy, you just want to stay there.
Yeah.
And this whole thing about pushing yourself and winning awards and all this sort of thing, it's wonderful. And what we're talking about in terms of, the milestones earlier on, the milestone is just a reminder of the work you've done. And if you want the next milestone, you've got to get up and get uncomfortable and do that work to get there again. And it's not just professionally, it's in every aspect of your existence, as a person, as a personality, as a partner, as a husband, as a brother, as human, as a professional, as a mentor, as whatever your role in life is.
Yeah. So what are your milestones that you're working towards now?
Oh, wow. Probably more than ever. It's internal. There have been, key things, events in life that have happened that you can kind of sit back with some level of pride and admiration, and no longer, and at the time it may have been scary, and say, this is where I changed, and this is what I achieved, and this is what it took to achieve it. And kind of key things for me were my passing of my mum, which was just before my GCSEs. And then during my GCSEs, one of my closest favorite uncles passed away during my exams.
Wow.
And it was, that was heavy and that was hard work. And
Very,
it's the conversations I had with myself then, as a 15-year-old, that made the difference, so that was that. It was going to university, discovering myself, studying architecture for a very long time because it was a very long course. And then choosing to give that up to become a photographer full time,
Yeah.
But, life changes for me is I'm currently going through a divorce, and it's one of these things that needed to happen or needs to happen just for our own growth and evolution, because life is a journey. You go through, you go through life to grow, and we could get into the spiritual existential side of these things if you like, but, keeping it simple, we all have things that we need to do to grow. And whilst I'm a romantic, and I think, marriage is something that's a beautiful thing. Obviously I'm a wedding photographer, and, your union with whoever it is something that you'd like to cherish. You don't get into a marriage hoping for divorce.
Oh no.
But universe is a big place. And once we grow to a point and then life plateaus, or you plateau, your growth plateaus, you have to zoom out and look at it macroscopically, because, when you're in it, you're looking at it microscopically, and you have to zoom out and have a look at the whole situation and see what's going on. Is there still growth? Has it plateaued? And where is that limitation coming from? Is that limitation coming from the scenario, the situation? Is it coming from within? Is it the other person? Is it, what's going on? And COVID, as we've spoken about this, COVID was an interesting spotlight on people.
Yeah.
It was COVID was a kid with a magnifying glass on an ant, basically. And not only did it amplify everything, it set fire to everything. So, you discover things about yourself. And whilst it sounds sad, having to go through a divorce and all this kind of thing, it's actually not. And I used to think it was quite a sad thing when people had to go through that. But so long as you grow from this, and you recognize the growth and the potential for what there is moving forward, so long as you can recognize that it doesn't need to be a bad and a sad thing, you're ready for whatever the next stage of your life is. And, unfortunately, what I felt was that evolution didn't happen quickly enough, and growth had stopped. There was a lot of stagnation, personally, professionally, creatively, mentally, spiritually, physically, in so many aspects. And the moment I recognized it, things started to change. Things started to unblock. And, what's happening is, if the pipe is blocked and you just keep filling it, it's just going to back up. It takes a while to unblock that and for that to clear. And, the analogy, the visual analogy, if you've watched Shawshank Redemption.
Oh, yes.
And he crawls out of the pipe, then it's that Shawshank pipe. And at the end, you get out the other side, you're covered in crap.
But there's no doubting where you've been. Yeah,
exactly. But you get to stand in the rain and breathe the fresh air, and you get on with life, and hopefully you end up on a beach, sanding down your yacht.
Yes.
But we can sand down, they polish it, wouldn't you? But anyway, you get the point. So, the growth, the change for me is more internal. And the interesting thing is, this will affect everything I do, including my photography, positively, because I am more positively biased than negatively. Despite the challenges and the hard work, I still try and see the positives in everything and see where the learnings are.
It can be quite surprising what positive things can come out of seemingly tragic situations. I mean, one of the things in positive psychology that people have started looking into is a concept called post-traumatic growth. Where it's actually looking at how it doesn't necessarily happen to everybody. Kind of the right sort of circumstances and so on need to be in place. But even a severe trauma can lead to a deeper appreciation of who the person is. They understand themselves better, their purpose, their connection with others, and so on and so forth. I mean, just in my own life, I mean, I used to be a professional musician. and absolutely loved playing guitar all the time. And then suddenly one year I lost use of my left hand, basically, and couldn't really feel my right hand normally either, and discovered after a while that it was MS, multiple sclerosis. So I've got nerve damage there, which stopped me from playing the guitar, stopped me from being a musician. And yeah, it's kind of easy to just think, oh, well, I'm going to crawl into a hole and that's it, and that's the end of my career. And you think, but I would never have become a photographer if it weren't for that. The photography
was it in that order?
The photography was initially a therapeutic activity. Because when I used to go for walks, I used to get very tired and I used to have problems of, it's like having an electric shock going up and down your spine and into your legs and things like that. And that, as I'm sure you can imagine, is not terribly comfortable. No. So going for a walk, I used to find that if I stopped and looked at some flowers and stuff regularly, then I could walk a lot further for a lot longer than if I just went for a walk.
Sure.
And I took a camera with me to extend that and to make myself a bit more observant of what was around me. And that then translated into that becoming my new creative outlet, because previously it had been music. If I was stressed, I would just pick my guitar up and play something, write a tune, you know. But I couldn't do that anymore. And the photography became that therapeutic outlet. And then it eventually sort of evolved into business. And you think, and then from that, I've ended up getting my fellowship. I've ended up becoming a judge. And you think none of that would have happened.
And a stonking good judge at that.
Oh, thank you. Much appreciated. Yeah. It's one of those things where you think, if one thing hadn't died like that, my music business, my career as a musician, if that hadn't died, I wouldn't be who I am and what I am now.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
It's strange how these things can sometimes happen.
You know, actually just sort of dipping into the spiritual side of this thing a little. I think, let's call it the esoteric. Let's dip into the esoteric a little bit. You know, there's a belief that you'll be given the signals and the opportunities and the cues to make a change, and it will start very gentle and very subtle. And if you miss it or ignore it, it'll come back a little bit stronger, a little bit with a little bit more pressure. And if you continue to ignore it or miss it, it'll just keep coming back until it grabs you by the scruff of the neck and shakes you up. And you know, there are certain things that we, as an individual and as, you know, a soul on this journey, if we're going to get into the spirituality, are meant to experience. And, you know, it's losing my mum at the age of 15 was supposed to happen. Would I love her to still be here? Yeah. What would life be like if she's still here? That's an amazing question for philosophers all over. But, you know, it's, it happened, and a lot of beautiful things have come as a result of that. Would I change it? Ooh, that's a big one. You know, when it comes to loss, would you want to change it? Of course, would want to. And we've all seen the science fiction movies when we bring back people who passed, and then, you know, the universe explodes. So we probably shouldn't.
It's so difficult to know, isn't it? Because you sort of think, well, if I'd have known sort of X number of years beforehand that was going to happen, if someone had told me that, I wouldn't have believed them. Yeah. I wouldn't have been in a position to be ready for it. And you know, if at the time when I had my severe relapse and was diagnosed with MS, if somebody had told me, you know, 10 years later you're going to be standing in front of a panel of judges getting a fellowship in photography, I just would have thought you're an idiot, you know, because it wasn't something that was even remotely on my radar. Trying to anticipate something. I know a lot of people love to have their 5-year plans and 10-year plans, but certainly for me, you know, there have been these just earthquakes, if you like, that have just changed the landscape so severely that you end up having to start again in many ways.
Yeah, this is interesting. Just thinking about what you were saying about go for a walk and being more sort of present and mindful with the camera. You know, there's a couple of interesting conversations that spawn off this. One answers your question about what's sort of next in terms of the growth for me, and the other one is, let's call it the state of the industry, you know, because and coming back to the point of technology and what cameras allow us to do, the new R1, for example, 40 frames a second, 40 frames a second, Joe.
That's an animation, isn't it? Really, that's a movie.
Yeah,
effectively.
That's a high frame rate movie.
Yeah.
The thing is, it's not just that. If we go back into old money, it's more than a roll of film every second.
Oh, yes, that's true. Yes, yeah.
Right. So think about the processes, and now, if we just take the film analogy, it forced you to be present. It forced you to be observant. It forced you to feel into the moment, which comes back to, my approach in photography, feeling the moment. You need to be aware. You need to be present. You need to be mindful in order to correlate what you're seeing and what you're feeling and translate that into an image and do justice and honor that moment, that moment in time, which is fleeting and that will never come back in the history of the universe certainly if we're not going to get into quantum physics, but
no, we've already swerved that one. Well, we shall swerve it again.
But the thing is that with digital photography and live view and no blackouts on the screen and, instant replay and press delete and, doing in-camera conversions and this, that, and the other, it is generating generation of, that was badly worded, wasn't it? Spawning a generation of photographers who will never grow into that discipline. And it's not their fault. Perhaps it is. Perhaps if they became aware of the fact that there was another option and they chose not to do it, then that is their fault. If you're presented with a choice, it's your responsibility to make an informed one or certainly explore the possibilities. And there's something to be said, when I teach, when I'm mentoring, if I'm doing a one-to-one or one-to-many or standing on stage or whatever it is, I always ask how many people have shot film, and it's always like 3% or something silly like this. It's tiny, and it does vary from talk to talk. There are some which are a little bit more old school, and there are some which are just, Gen Z. What's after Gen Z? Do we go back to A, or is it like the British number plate where they invent a new system?
I haven't. I don't know. I don't know.
What's the next registration plate? I don't know. 96 generation. 96 plate generation of humans.
Yeah.
They'll do it just because it's cool and retro. Which is fine. That's fine. So long as you get into it and you just slow it down. And this is how I frame it to them. It's like, if you were shooting a wedding 30 years ago, not even 30, let's say 30 years ago with film, the rule of thumb was a roll of film per hour, a 36 exposure per hour. Okay. And if you had two cameras, then you spread that out because you're not going to shoot with two cameras at one go. You had to wind the film on. You had to set your manual exposure and you had to focus manually and you had to frame it and take your time and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So if it was a roll of film an hour, that gave you up to one shot every 2 minutes. I challenge any photographer. I couldn't do it nowadays just because of the pace of things and become accustomed to technology, but I challenge any photographer to attempt to only take one shot every 2 minutes. That shot really has to count. Has to count. And I'm talking about, it's the essence, that synergy we were talking about early on. You suddenly are forced to embody and endow that image with everything you can muster. And when people think about it like that, everyone gasps. Because everyone's shooting at 15, 20 frames a second at the moment. A lot of throwaway shots. And this is why, AI culling has had to be invented, because people come back with 20,000 shots per camera, and if you've got a team team of 2 or 3 with me, everyone's coming back with ridiculous numbers of images because the younger generation don't have that discipline. It's mad.
Oh, yeah. It's too much, and I think it's one of those kind of blessings and curses of technology that sometimes when things become easier, it makes it more accessible in some respects. People who are perhaps who don't have some of the degrees of skill or some of the budget can have a go at things. Yeah. And that, on the one hand, is great. But on the other hand, it can make it so it becomes almost disposable, so that then people don't necessarily see why they should invest the time in creating something, or why they invest the time in their skills and so on. So it's like, with self-publishing, anybody can publish a book now.
Yeah.
You don't have to go through that sort of fight with a publisher to get your book out. But with photos, it's just so easy to create so many. A bit like it's so easy to send texts and emojis and things like that. Right, that sometimes the depth of what you're actually saying can suffer as a result.
Well, it's because, and it comes back to that presence is no longer there. Okay, if you're immersed in a moment and that moment demands a high frame rate because something's going to happen very quickly, it makes sense so long as you're immersed in the moment, but you are still going to have a lot of shots that are throwaway because you're shooting either side of that critical moment, the decisive moment. And it is a balance. It's absolutely a balance. And I think we as photographers in the digital age do need to slow down and be more present, especially when we're photographing emotional events like a wedding, because that's the primary thing. It's be switched on. You're a human. Be a human. Feel the emotion. If what's happening in front of you makes you want to cry, damn it. Keep shooting, but cry. Feel it, because again, you will infuse your work with the emotion you're feeling, and that's the point of what we do as photographers. You and I are speaking English right now, but we also speak in visual terms, and that's also a shared language, and our style is our dialect of speaking. And we visually translate what we are seeing and feeling and experiencing at any given moment in life. And at a wedding, you're not just experiencing the wedding, you're experiencing pain and joy and sorrow and anxiety and fatigue and excitement and, whatever it is you're feeling. It's all combined in that moment to create what you're creating. And feel it all, and use it to fuel you. The other analogy I sort of give is I quite enjoy running, although that probably doesn't show at the moment. I quite enjoy running, and if I go running when I'm in a good mood, it's a really mediocre run, because there's no growth in the comfort zone. But if something has irritated me, I usually have the best run ever, because I'm just using that angst to power me. So I'm transmuting it through the running and not letting it affect my mental state. And it's the same thing with photography. We've got to channel what we do, and I think that's, let's try and sort of summarize the essence of everything we're talking about here, is that if photography is an art form and a form of expression, and it's representation of how each of us see the world, it's a culmination of not just the stimulus in front of us that we're capturing, but how we respond to those emotions, how we react to that stimuli through the filter of the person we've become over the number of years of our life.
And that's how we can all be unique and bring our unique perspective and not worry so much about in aspects of competing and, it's our own perspective that we're bringing.
Well, who are you competing with? I think competition is healthy.
Yeah, to an extent, yes. I think, if everything becomes about wanting to be the best, what is the best anyway? And, there are aspects of it, of taking yourself further, which can be very, very useful.
Yeah.
At the same time, you think, well, everybody's different. So in a sense, nobody can compete directly with you because nobody's going to see the world the way that you do. But
nail on the head. Yeah, and I think that's a key one when it comes to style, which is another question I get asked a lot about. Particularly from new photographers or photographers who are reinventing themselves. It's like, how do I find my style? And the short, lazy answer is go stare in the mirror. But there's so much truth in that, because your style it comes from within. It is you. It's how you see the world. And if you're honoring that moment that you're capturing with all the emotion that you have at your disposal, combined with your skill and your creativity and your technical prowess and expertise and experience, no one will ever be able to recreate what you've done, because the stimulus behind what you created will never exist ever again. If you're going to look at it at a microscopic level, and that's the truth. You are you and no one else is you. And we've all been on workshops where either we set the task or we've been set the task of capturing the same thing as everyone else, and everyone always creates something different because, everyone feels different in the moment. And it's just really about recognizing that. And that's the thing that you have to be mindful and present on, is your feeling, understanding that, so we all have to be emotionally intelligent and mature to be able to, not necessarily mature, but at least emotionally receptive.
Yeah, some of us can be mature occasionally, but in between times.
You don't always need to be.
No.
You have to have fun with these things.
Absolutely. And maturity is only a culturally imposed norm anyway, so,
Yeah, I can go with that. Yeah, that gives us a lot of passes, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah. No, that's just a culturally imposed norm. That
just a construct.
Yeah. For a free ticket to anarchy. No, I don't think so. No, no, I think it is important that we realise that being authentic, being true to ourselves, rather than trying to emulate someone else or be something else, is the key to so much in life, really. And running a successful photography business is no different. So people can look at you and what you do, but they shouldn't copy what you do directly. They can draw on that understanding that you've used to be yourself and your business to be an expression of who you are.
And that whole thing about copying, I always used to just have nothing but scorn for that. And I largely do even today, but there is some merit in it, and it comes from recognizing when it's appropriate. And what is propriety in that particular situation? It's one, not passing it off as your own. Okay. And some people say, well, I pressed the button and, is what I was feeling in the moment. But okay, fine. We can sit and debate that all day long. That's not the point. So long as you recognize that the exercise you're going through is a mimetic one, like a child learning how to walk, where you just do things repetitively by mimicking, creatively mimicking, until you let that mimicry go, because you recognize that you can go under your own steam. And that's growth. That moment there, that's the moment of growth. It's not the ability to be able to do it. It's recognizing the ability to be able to do it. It's always that recognition. It always is. Because a lot of people can do stuff, but they believe they can't. And that's where the what's that phrase called? Imposter syndrome. That's where imposter syndrome comes from. We all have it. We all have imposter syndrome. We can do things. We know we can do it. We just don't believe ourselves. But the moment you believe in it and you recognize that, hold on, you know what? I've got this. Everything changes.
And something which I think is also very important in that regard is that mutual support within the industry for one another, in terms of recognizing what someone's style is, what someone's strengths are, and encouraging them to keep going in that direction, to pursue what makes them unique. It's one of those things that when mixing with other professionals can be really, really powerful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hearing it from somebody else, especially when you've got that sort of imposter syndrome type feeling that, but that's how I see, that's what I see your work as. That image there, that to me is, that's an expression of you as I know you.
Yeah.
When you can do that for other people, as a mentor, as a coach, as a teacher, it's one of those things where we can get so easily caught up in analyzing and criticizing, but giving that kind of positive feedback is actually good for the person giving it as well as the person receiving it. Yeah. I'm not saying you should do it from a selfish point of view of, I want to feel good, therefore I'll give it. Yeah. But, I think it's something that does good to both.
And there's nothing wrong with that, by the way.
Yeah. It's not something that's going to somehow devalue your work a little bit if you're giving someone else praise. That it doesn't work that way. It boosts you both up by,
absolutely.
Being able.
That's why we do what we do as as judges. That critique is the growth. It's we're not allowed to swear here, but the poo sandwich, where we have to,
yes, exactly.
You've got to give the growth bit, which is the uncomfortable part. If you just said nice things all the time, there's no growth.
Yeah.
If it's just bread in the sandwich, there's no substance. You're not gonna.
Yeah.
It's just carbs, isn't it? But that thing you were saying about the recognition, and this is another interesting one that I've spent a bit of time thinking about too, is what about the recognition? What is it about the recognition that we're talking about here? Because there's industry-wide recognition, there's recognition from, say, brands as, to make you an ambassador. It's like, what's the recognition? Is it the box to stand on to say, look at me? Or is it the responsibility that comes with that of being seen? And that's the key thing. So when someone says, this is the thing about your work that I recognize, I see you within your work here. Why that's powerful is because you've been seen. And you've been seen through a facet of how you see yourself, of your own vision. And that's where that connection came from. And that's what lifts people, actually. Anyone can give, platitudes and just say nice things here and there because it's a polite thing to do. But when it doesn't have that sincerity because it just seems like the right thing to do, rather than genuinely being seen, it doesn't have the same impact.
Yeah, I mean, it's a funny thing because the podcast, there are a few different reasons why I started it. One of it, which is trying to show people behind the scenes of the titles and the award winners and the glitzy professionals and all that kind of thing, give them a sense of what it's really like and what they need to do in order to be sort of successful within the industry. That's part of it. It also trying to show the diversity of people that are within it. But it was also something that a couple of people said that they probably didn't think much of it at a convention a few years ago. And one of them was actually you. And that was, you've got a voice that sounds like it would be good on radio.
I remember that.
I'm glad you didn't say face, So, you've got a face for radio, but yeah.
Was this while we were judging?
Yeah, independently, sort of one a little bit after we'd finished, and there was you at one point. I think midway through the judging, you just sort of said, with my voice over as it was coming through the amplifier, and oh, you've got a voice for radio, and
that was intended as a compliment always.
But even a little thing like that, in together with the other ideas that I had at the time, made me think, oh, podcast, so. That's how simple sharing something positive with someone can be in terms of the knock-on impact.
Yeah. I'm glad. I'm glad you took it the way it was intended.
Yeah.
I'm glad it's had, that positive effect because, and this is a thing, as people, not just as photographers, forget ambassadors and photographers and judges and all this kind of stuff. As people, we have a responsibility. Our words are powerful. And our energy is powerful. And sometimes we're only human. We make mistakes. We misspeak.
Of course. Yeah, absolutely.
But if if the intention is to wound with your words, then, there's a consequence that comes from that too. But, this is why it's so important to generally be positive and not cynical and be helpful as much as possible. Try and see good in people, even when they let you down. And if they continue to let you down, you just sort of sever that limb and you move on. But you've done what you needed to do. And hopefully at some point there's growth and learning for those people. If you continue to do good and it has an impact like this, where just it plants a little seed for somebody. That's priceless.
Yep, I knew it would be interesting getting to have a chat with you, Sanjay. I knew it would be good to be able to have you on the podcast, and I'm not just having you on because you helped to inspire me to do it. It's because I know you're an interesting guy anyway, and we've had a really good conversation, I think, and I hope it encourages listeners to develop themselves, to look at themselves and their work, to think about how they can share something positive with others and build up the industry and continue to do so. So thank you very much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
I would just like to say, where can people go to see more about what you're doing, more of your work? Where's the most sort of up-to-date? Is it on social or on your website? What's the best place to go?
So that's all going through a bit of an evolution with me, actually.
Okay.
My current website, which is eyejogia.com, which is EYEJOGIA.com. It's a bit dated. There's a new website on its way. So just kind of or you'll probably just have to search my name. On Instagram, I'm there as iJogia Photo Cinema. There's actually a personal account there, which I don't really do much with. A lot of people have been following me on that, but iJogia is kind of where my wedding work is at. I'm on Twitter or X, Sanjay Jogia. I'm on LinkedIn, Sanjay Jogia. I'm on Facebook, Sanjay Jogia. And my page is iJogia. Or you could just go to Google and type my name and a bunch of stuff will come up. There's a whole lot of like articles and blogs and ambassador stuff and things like that there. But, this next year is going to be filled with a lot of updates and new stuff, new content. And it's an exciting year coming. So, yeah.
Well, look forward to keeping up with the world of Sanjay.
Thank you.
So thanks again for coming on the podcast. It's been really great talking to you.
You too, Joe. You too.
And thank you, everybody, for listening. This is the Focused Professional Podcast.